That's all of the time that we have for this presentation, but thank you so much. I am going to move on to our next presenter. So next is Adam Korengold. He will be giving his presentation titled Visualizing the AAGPBL Through the Lens of Data. Adam is analytics lead at the National Library of Medicine at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, and an adjunct faculty member at the Maryland Institute College of Art, as well as a SABR member. Adam, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Jessica, for the kind introduction. I've loved all the presentations that we including me. Data visualization is something that I feel quite passionately about. So I'm really happy to be able to present to you some work that I've done about the league, about the AAGPBL. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. The title of my presentation again is Visualizing the AAGPBL Through the Lens of Data. And hopefully we can get my buttons to work here. There we go. So a little bit about me. You see me here with Ginger the Wonder Chihuahua. I've been a SABR member since 2020. As Jessica said, I'm an analytics lead at the National Library of Medicine, which is one of 28 institutes at the National Institutes of Health. I also teach in the graduate data analytics and visualization program at MICA. So this is a program for graphic designers and people with a little bit more of a design angle who really want to learn about creating compelling data visualization. So the common thread in all of this is using visuals to show trends at a product level or a segment level for a company, or in this case, visualizing the league, and also teaching people how to do it. So as we become a more visually oriented society, people don't really want to look at spreadsheets or white papers. They want to see kind of tangible, understandable visuals. And one of the things that you see a lot, and even that you see in some baseball data visualization, is there's this trade-off between doing things that are really beautiful and really complicated, but that are kind of hard to understand, especially given really short attention spans and really quick edits in a lot of documentaries and videos and things like that, and having things that are really readily understandable. So I tend to go more towards the latter part of the dynamic. So for me, it's really about creating visuals that are artistically pretty, but that are also easy to understand, easy to pick trends out of. So my plan for today is really to do three things. So to first of all, walk through the rationale for visualizing data, why we do this, then to go through the process that I used specifically for the AAGPBL data, which was kind of interesting, not necessarily the way I expected it to go, but it ended up well. And then what do we find out from doing this, and what are some potential next steps? So first off, let's define data visualization, which Edward Tufte, who's kind of like the graybeard in data visualization, defines as the visual display of quantitative information. People have really strong opinions about Edward Tufte. Some people love him, some people hate him, but for many data visualizers, his books are their first exposure to this idea of visualizing data. And the way I often frame this is it's both the first mile of research, because showing data visually is really useful for exploration, iteration, and discovery, but it's also the last mile of research because this is how people see the work that we've done. So it's really important for communicating, presenting, and showing the insights that you've created. Why data visualization? Well, it's a new way of showing data and information. Again, not just in white papers or spreadsheets. And there's also a whole subgenre of data storytelling. So this idea that we're not just creating a graphic that shows the relationship of one data point to another, but we're using it to tell stories, using charts and pictures to take the audience through a narrative. So visualization shows what spreadsheets really can't. This comes from Anna and Shira's presentation yesterday about a league of their own. And what's so compelling about this visualization is that it shows all the comments that came in and all the participants in discussions about the Amazon show last year. And note how many of them come from countries, from geographies that, even though this was a very LGBTQIA+ friendly show, that come from countries that are not themselves friendly to the LGBTQIA+ community. So it's really important to show, in terms of representation, where people are and what challenges they might face. If you saw this in the form of a spreadsheet, it wouldn't have quite the same impact. But now we can look at where people are located on a map, where comments have been generated on a map, and actually see where they're coming from. Likewise, and this is taken from the same presentation yesterday, visualizations can show information in aggregate. So even though there isn't quantitative data here, it's still a data visualization because it shows us the breadth of content that's been created by fans of the show. And it's just so important, again, to see the topics that are covered, the kinds of representations that are covered, and why this was such an important show. So as we turn to the AAGPBL itself, what are some stories that we can tell about the league and how it evolved? So Ryan gave a great talk yesterday about not just the history of the league, but the history of what happened after the league. And we know that over the 12 seasons that it played, it changed a lot. There were rules changes, there were teams that came and went. So it wasn't constituted the same way for all the years that it played. So data and visualizing data can tell us that part of the story, and it can also tell us who some notable players were and how they compared with each other. So the visualization process, I like to keep it pretty simple, and I tend to break it down into 3 components. So the first being identifying and cleaning the data. And this can be the most time-consuming part of the process because it doesn't just involve finding the data that you want to use, but transforming it into a usable format. And I'll get into a little bit more depth in that in a couple of slides. The second element is choosing the data points that are most relevant to your audience. And this is where I'll say again that I find that simpler is often better, especially where your audience isn't necessarily used to seeing data represented in this way. We don't want to get necessarily deeply into sabermetrics or Bill James style data because it's a little bit harder to get your head around what those data points mean typically. So I like to keep things pretty simple. And you'll see what data points I chose later on. And then finally, we visualize the data. And this is the part that's very iterative, that's very fun. You can test different ways of presenting your data to different audiences or even just to the people around you. And again, here, aiming for simplicity is often a really good idea. Some of the tools that come in handy, you see listed here. And I present this slide so that you have a sense of what the universe looks like and what tools are available. So in my professional work at the library, I tend to pull data from, might be generated in Excel, or it might be from a publicly available source. And I tend to use Tableau because that's the one that I have the most experience with. It's pretty powerful, it's pretty flexible, But there are lots of tools that you can use here. Excel or Sheets, which are basic spreadsheets, SPSS or SAS, R or RStudio if you're more of a programmer. Then for choosing data points, you can also do that in Excel. You can even visualize in Excel too. But if you program in SQL, if you use BigQuery, which is Google's big data lake, Python is also a programming tool that's really good for coding and choosing data points. And then to visualize, I mentioned I use Tableau. A lot of my colleagues at NLM use Microsoft's Power BI. PowerPoint is a really good visualization tool. Figma is also a good tool. And really what I say in red is the most important thing here, that any way that you're comfortable doing this is fine. I work actually in an IT department, and as I often tell people, I am the least qualified IT person in the IT department. But the people that work for me and with me are really, really good in all of these tools, especially in Python and SQL programming and coding and querying. Some of them are really good in R. So it's really about finding the tool that works best for you. Because I'm not much of a programmer, sometimes when I find a good data set, that best data set is in hard copy. And in this case, I used W.C. Walden's record book for the AAGPBL, which is a hard copy book. And so if I want to visualize these numbers in Tableau, the only way to do it was to code it, enter it into, in this case, I used Google Sheets, and it took me somewhere between 40 and 80 hours. So it was really kind of intense and rote kind of work. You can see a screenshot of my dog-eared copy of the book where I literally went through every single line that had relevant statistics in it, and I just entered it into my database. And as often happens with hard copy records, those records aren't perfect. So sometimes there were data points missing that I had to calculate myself or extrapolate, and that probably added about another 10 or so hours to the work. But in the end, I got a set of batting statistics in Google Sheets, and I also got a set of pitching statistics in Google Sheets. And some of these I actually calculated on my own. So for the pitching stats here, you see a strikeouts per walk ratio, a whip, walk hits per innings pitched. So those I actually calculated on my own because they weren't in this record book. And if you look closely down below, I had a separate spreadsheet for every year. So this made it easy when I did load it into Tableau Public. Tableau Public is the free version of Tableau. You can get a desktop version for about $70 a month. But Tableau Public, quite honestly, is just as good. It's free. It lets you take part in their community. And you can upload this data set into Tableau Public so you can visualize it. So for each one of these, what you see here, if you look closely, is I've connected both the pitcher and the batter database, and then each one of those had a separate sheet for each year. So I was able to connect those two databases in a union, and that let me actually visualize the data that you see here. So this is where each one of these dots represents a single batter or a single pitcher by season. Each season is represented by a separate color. And if you go to my Tableau Public profile, and I have a URL in this presentation that you can copy and paste into your browser so you can go there and interact with it. If you mouse over every one of these dots, it will show you that separate batter or separate pitcher. But what I think is really useful here is looking at the trends by year from 1943 to 1954. So what we see here is offensive performance went up, especially in that final year when there were only 5 teams, and pitching performance likewise declined. So I've reversed the vertical axis on this. So ERA and strikeout to walk ratio and WHIP, which, you want to be lower. Being lower indicates better performance. So you're seeing that pitching got a little bit worse during the course of the 12 years, but batters seem to get the upper hand, especially with home runs. And that has to do with a number of different things, probably associated with the increasing distance between home plate and the pitching rubber, and the advent of overhand pitching during the life of the league, and also with the decline in the number of teams in 1954 that also have led to better offensive performance. So we can also highlight specific players. So what you see here are 6 batters. So Lefty Alvarez, thanks Cat Williams, Helen Callahan, Eleanor Callow, Anita Foss, Dorothy Kamenchek, and the great Joanne Weaver, who in 1954 had a higher batting average than really anyone in the modern era. Certainly beat out Ted Williams for the highest in modern major league history, if we consider the AAGPBL a major league, which baseball isn't quite there yet. But what I've done here is I've color-coded by year each player's performance. You see them referred to with their cards up here. Some of them have been embellished by me as card paintings. But the idea here is it's a simple chart. We have a simple scatter plot showing on-base percentage and slugging percentage. The size of the dot, I think, represents OPS, so on-base plus slugging. And you can see that there's not a whole lot of divergence. Some of them are a little better than others, but you see Joanne Weaver's 1954 season up here. Again, this isn't an interactive chart, but if you go to Tableau Public, it will be interactive. Likewise, from the mound, we can do the same thing. So here, Lefty Alvarez also pitched a little bit, but we also see Jean Fout, Helen Nickel, Joanne Winter, and Connie Wisniewski, and their cards represented up here. You see averages also represented. So in the interactive version of this, if I want to click on Joanne Winter, then it'll highlight just her seasons, showing ERA against WHIP and the averages for her career. And the other thing I wanted to mention here is that data visualization doesn't have to be on a computer. And this is something that I tell my students a lot, but it's also something that I work with a lot in my own practice, that not everybody has access to a computer, is able to navigate to something like Tableau Public, or really wants to interact with data, but we can show this visually on canvas. These are both 2 small acrylic on canvas paintings. One is of Joanne Weaver comparing her performance, which is in red, to, I think this is Rogers Hornsby, this is Ted Williams' average. Again, it's not a perfect data visualization. This is something that I've been experimenting with quite a bit, but it lets you see how she compares with other season-long batting averages. This one compares Ricky Henderson to Cool Papa Bell's stolen base totals, and I can go into a little bit more detail on that later. So where do we go with this as data visualizers and people who are interested in women's baseball? One is I'd be happy to share this database with you, again, crediting it to the author and compiler of the database, but this is something that we're able to do to add value and to continue seeing how can we visualize this data set. So I'd be happy to work with you to share that database. Also with incorporating data visualization into our own research and into data journalism. So I'd love to see where we could go with this as a next step. So that brings my presentation to a close. I wanted to thank all of you for listening, and thanks again to Leslie for including me. And I hope that we can use these insights and use data visualization to create even more impact for the work that all of us do. If you have any questions, you can contact me on my Gmail, on Instagram or Threads, where I share a lot of my work, also on LinkedIn. And this is the link also to my Tableau Public, so you can copy and paste that into your own browser and interact with the data. So with that, I'll stop sharing, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks, Adam. I did see one a little earlier. Lorene asked, where do you look for your data sets, or do they find you?
Okay, sure. So it depends on what you're looking for. For a lot of the baseball research I do, I go to Baseball Reference and StatHead, but they don't have AAGPBL data. So the big reference for me was the record book that I mentioned before. Oh, thanks so much, Perry. And that's really, that was the most challenging part of this project, honestly, was but it wasn't so much in finding a comprehensive set of records, it was in getting those records to work as a virtual database. And so it didn't go, Google Sheets into Tableau Public, but there was a little bit of trial and error involved in figuring out, well, how can I create a union of these two data sets so that I'll be able to visualize them on the same chart, like that first one that you saw. And that's called just creating a union in Tableau, and you kind of have to fiddle with it a little bit, make sure that you've created the right worksheets in Google Sheets and that they all fit together in the right way, and making sure that it all works together. So that took a long time.
Would you mind sharing your screen with your contact information on it just one more time?
Sure. Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. Okay, there we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, and you can also find me, my profile's up on the SABR community too. And you can find me there. So there's a lot of applications to this. Like one project that I thought of yesterday after the great presentation about sports writers is SABR has access to the online archive and ProQuest of Black newspapers. And so I wasn't able to figure this out yesterday yet, but I want to get bylines, basically all the bylines of women sports writers for these Black newspapers, and to get a sense of who wrote what and when, about what, because that's something that would be really interesting to visualize.
Anybody else have any questions for Adam? All I see is good things in the chat, which is awesome. This is a great presentation. Thank you again. Oh, Maureen asked, OCR, has it not improved enough? Sorry, Maureen.
Right, it hasn't. Yeah. Yeah, and although something, I think we're hearing increasingly about the potential for artificial intelligence in research. So I wonder if part of it is just the technical capability of OCR to recognize data coming from a printed source, but a lot of current baseball data is online, and so I would wonder how good AI would get at picking out, say, bylines from articles or data from box scores or things like that. But I don't think we're quite there yet, and certainly the use case for AI is not proven, and we all want to stay here as writers and analysts. But that's a whole separate conversation.